Atlantis, the archaeology and genetics in Europe and Africa. So Plato says that the events of the War of Atlantis, the Atlantean invasion, occurred around 9,000 years before Solon, so around 9600 BC. They came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean, and they invaded Libya up to Egypt and Europe up to Terrania, which is in modern-day Italy. So this is just showing a potential location of Atlantis, as the Timaeus says, in the Atlantic. And then again, as Plato says, they invaded Europe up to Terrania in Italy, and then Libya, which is North Africa, up to the borders of Egypt. So at this time that Plato indicates, 9600 BC, do we have people or genetic material, people migrating or expanding in these directions in 9600 BC? And we do. So haplogroups H1, H3, H5, V, and U5B1b, these are maternal mitochondrial DNA haplogroups, spread eastward from an Iberian glacial refugium into Central and Northern Europe, but also southeast into Northwest Africa between 13,000 and 7,000 BC. And these mitochondrial haplogroups are carried by modern-day Berbers, Sami, people of Scandinavia, as well as the Basque, who live in the modern-day region, which archaeologically is known as the Franco-Cantabrian refugium, which a lot of these papers also references, as part of the Iberian refugium that these maternal haplogroups are expanding out of. So these maternal haplogroups are associated with the spread of the Magdalenian, Ahrensberg, and Swiderian cultures, as well as the Iberomaurusian culture. Mary Sedegast, in her book Plato Prehistorian, identifies the invading Atlanteans in Africa with the Iberomaurusians and in Europe with the Magdalenians, which again corresponds to the time of the supposed Atlantean invasion of Africa and Europe. So all these studies are basically saying, these first study here identifies the flow of H1V, U5B1b with the spread of the Ahrensberg and Swiderian archaeological complexes and a post-late glacial maximum recolonization of Europe. Again, these are the dates for those cultures: Magdalenian, Ahrensberg, Swiderian, associated with these haplogroups, originating in Western Europe, expanded from this refugium. This study is showing that it's associated with the Magdalenian expansion of 13,000 BC, but also as late as 10,000 BC, again referencing H1 and H3. Again, these dates are a little bit of a broader range, between 13,000 to 8,000 BC in this study for V and H. Sexual migratory differences, so we're just talking about maternal haplogroups, so for whatever reason, either only females migrated or invaded, what have you, or perhaps the male line was entirely replaced and for whatever reason the female line still persisted. And again, they expanded southward from Iberia into North Africa. And that's why the Berbers, the Tuareg, also the Basque and the Sami all have these haplogroups because they all expanded around this time. Again, H5, 11,000 BC, V1, H1, H3, 9,000 BC, which is closer to our date of, 9,600. Again, there's a big range, so it's probably waves of migrations, but still. Partial genetic continuity of contemporary Basques since pre-Neolithic times. So, again, the areas where these haplogroups originally spread from, they're still in the inhabitants of the same region in modern day, which are the Basque. Sami of Scandinavia and the Berbers share a very young branch of haplogroup U, aged only 7,000 BC. Again, these studies are all basically just showing the same thing. The Sami of Scandinavia, the Berbers, the Basque. This is showing the Swiderian culture on the left, which eventually gives way to the Magdalenian culture on the right. So the Swiderian is largely confined to the Iberian refugium, but the Magdalenian expands into Central and Northern Europe. And then the Ahrensberg and Swiderian are a little bit more north even. And you can see in dark red, this is contrasted with the Epigravettian, which again, Plato says that the Atlanteans invaded Europe up to Tyrrhenia, which is modern-day Italy. So the Swiderian is genetically linked to the Magdalenian in this paper. Magdalenian is distinct from Epigravettians with Villabruna ancestry who practice primary burials, and instead the Magdalenians were practicing exocannibalism from intergroup confrontations due to expansion and competition, tension between groups. So they were, potentially raiding these local groups as they expanded and cannibalizing them. And this is shown by the lack of respect, again supporting exocannibalism, in contrast to the primary burials associated with the Villabruna cluster. And they made skull cups as war trophies, even cannibalizing adolescents and juveniles, mixing the remains of cannibalized individuals with the remains of consumed animals, like showing that they're basically garbage, right? So it's not ritualized endocannibalism like some cultures do, but rather exocannibalism with a lack of empathy. Magdalenians are in Poland, Mazika Cave, doing cannibalism by as early as 16,000 BC. Gau's Cave, we have 3 skull cups dated to 12,700. So this is just showing that these groups carrying these genes, again, these group archaeological cultures, the Magdalenian specifically, associated with those haplogroups from 13,000 to 7,000 BC in their spread, is responsible for cannibalism against the locals as they're spreading and intergroup conflicts. The Iberomaurusians, potentially the same. This is their spread in northwest Africa. So lesions at the Tafaral burial suggest intentional killing and cannibalism. Mary Sedegast, in her book Plato Prehistorian, suggests that the Jebel Sahaba burial individuals were killed by invading Iberomaurusians and that they belong to the Khadan. This study says that they are Khadan. This one says that they aren't, but it's debated. But either way, they're not Iberomaurusian, so it's possible that the Iberomaurusians killed them. It says of the burials, their projectile nature of half the lesions, at least, suggests intergroup attacks rather than intragroups or domestic conflicts. Some other interesting things about the Iberomaurusians: they were very complex, it seems, and advanced. They did successful skull trepanation and tooth ablation, so tooth removal, around 13,000 BC, using ephedra as a medicine for pain reduction and bleeding reduction. So pretty advanced. This is just showing that the Guanches and the Berbers both have some ancestry from these Paleolithic Maghreb individuals, aka, again, the Iberomaurusians, who potentially, again, killed the people at Jebel Sahaba, which might date as old as 9500 BC, which is right around, very close to the 9600 BC that Plato gives. So we just talked about a very small part of it today. We only talked about really these maternal haplogroups highlighted in blue in Africa and Europe, and then these cultures, right? So H1, H3, H5, V U5B1b maternal haplogroups, are associated with a spread from an Iberian refugium from the west eastward, but also southeast into northern Africa. And this occurred, again, probably in waves, but between 13,000 to 7,000 BC. And Plato's date of the Atlanteans invading Europe up to Italy, and then North Africa up to Egypt, of 9600 BC falls right in the range of the dates for the expansion of these maternal haplogroups. So it's possible that they expanded directly from the Iberian refugium, or if Atlantis is here in the Atlantic, in front of the Strait of Gibraltar, as Plato claims, then perhaps they actually spread from there directly into North Africa and Europe. And again, the Magdalenians carrying these haplogroups, getting into conflict perhaps with the local Epigravidians doing exocannibalism, perhaps making war trophies even. And then the Iberomaurusians, perhaps we need more data to be sure, but they could be responsible for the deaths at Jebel Sahaba. And again, also maybe doing some exocannibalism, who knows. But at least the genetic and archaeological data we looked at today suggests that Plato's narrative of a Atlantean invasion of Africa and Europe from the west to the east is, consonant, or at least plausible, given the genetic data we looked at and the archaeological data. Anyway, thank you.